Well, today I'm in the middle of my turnip food plot. Several years ago, I made a video on planting turnips and how the deer reacted to them on my property. I still receive many comments on that video, and in fact, I received some questions through email. And in today's video, I'll answer some of those questions. I'll also give you some of maybe my tips and tricks and my opinion on what I think works best in my area. So I encourage you to stick around, and we'll be talking turnips and maybe some do's and don'ts on small food plots. So one of the first questions that I almost always receive about turnips is, will deer even eat turnips? Well, the simple answer is yes. At least my deer eat turnips. That's one of the main reasons I plant them. While turnips can have additional benefits, like having a taproot, goes down in the soil, can help break up tight soil. And there's other benefits to planting turnips. The main reason I plant them is for the deer in my area. I find them great for a late season food source. Now, I also get the comments from folks that say I've planted turnips and the deer will not touch them. Now, that is simply not the case with the deer in my area. In fact, I operate trail cameras, so I have numerous trail cameras over this small turnip food plot, and the deer hit these turnips consistently, and the cameras have proved time and time again that the deer do in fact eat the turnips, not only the greens on the top of the turnip, they will actually eat the turnip themselves. Now, one caveat to that statement is, from my observations, the deer hit these turnips as it gets colder, meaning after we have frost and as we go into winter, it seems the colder it gets, the harder the deer are in my turnip plot. Now, does that mean the deer do not prefer the turnips until they are cold or frozen, or does that mean there's simply not any other food and that's their last resort? I honestly don't know the answer to that, and it simply could be a combination of both. There's just simply no other food sources. They ran out of all other food, so they simply resort to the turnips, or that the cold weather, the freezing, the frost makes them more palatable, and then they come to them. Either way, I have found the colder it gets, the more that they are in my turnip plot. So that leaves the question, if you never have a frost in your area or you do not have hard winters, will the deer ever take a liking to the turnips? That's a question I simply can't answer. I can only go by my experience here in Pennsylvania, and that seems as November comes, the deer start showing up to these turnips, and the colder it gets as we progress through December and January and the rest of the winter, the more activity I see in this food plot. So the next question I often get is, do I plant anything with my turnips? Well, that's a loaded question because almost every year I do a little something different. There are years that I'll plant a cereal grain with the turnips, like a rye or a winter wheat. There are times where I plant simply the turnips. This past season, I planted clover with my turnips. In fact, in early June, I worked the ground in this food plot, and then I let the ground sit to take care of any weeds. I am an organic farmer, so I do not use any pesticides or insecticides for the past 15 years plus. So I simply rely on tillage for weed control. So early June, I'm working that ground. I'm letting it sit for several weeks. And then at the end of June, I worked the ground again and planted clover. Now you might say, Hunting Farmer, you're supposed to be a farmer. You do not plant clover at the end of June, going right into the heat of the summer. Well, that's a good point, but I am simply swamped in the spring and early summer doing all the field work that actually pays my bills, so the food plots take the back burner. But when I finally get a break, then I start concentrating on the food plot. So again, I worked my plot at the beginning of June. I have a rototiller that fits on the front of my skid loader, worked the ground up, let it sit, and then came back in at the end of June and worked it one more time. I then had a beautiful seed bed, and I broadcasted my clover on top of that seed bed. I then rolled that in with a cultipacker to get that seed to soil contact, and then I had one giant advantage on my side. I applied moisture that day. Now, although the water coming out of my tank there did look a little tainted, it's simply rinsing out the tank. I would have hauled manure here in my farm, and then to rinse the tank, I fill it with water, and where better to put that than on my food plots. So by planting my seed and then applying moisture that very same day, I get near instant germination. In fact, in less than 1 week, I had total green across my food plot. And I realize that's an advantage that not everybody has, but that is a tip. If you have any way possible of adding water to your plot, that's a surefire way of getting great germination, and that's actually what allows me to plant at any time throughout the summer, not having to worry about drought or moisture, or at least not near as much, because if push comes to shove, I can put maybe 1,000 gallons of water in a relatively short amount of time. Now, up to this point, I haven't mentioned planting my turnips, and that is because I did not plant my turnips at the end of June when I planted my clover. I wanted to get my clover a little more established. I did not want the turnips to take over, and in fact, in my opinion, planting turnips at the end of June, beginning of July is just simply too early. So I'd planted my clover at the end of June. I got great germination because of that instant moisture, and I waited 1 month to plant my turnips. Now again, this is a little unconventional, but I simply came in and broadcasted my turnips in my new seeding clover. I then mowed my clover after I broadcasted my turnip seeds in that new seeding of clover. That is key. In fact, you would have a hard time just broadcasting turnips into an existing clover plot and then mowing it, but with the combination of a new seeding, broadcasting my turnips over top of that new seeding, and then mowing that new seeding, it got my turnips down where they needed to be, and they got that seed to soil contact. Now fast forward 1 more month to the end of August, and the plots were looking great. Now in hindsight, last year was a great year. Even throughout the summer, we did receive moisture here, whereas other parts of the country really struggled with moisture. In my area, we did receive adequate moisture, so I didn't have to give any supplemental water, and my clover and turnips looked great at the end of August. So to recap, I planted my clover at the end of June, I planted my turnips at the end of July. At the end of August, I came back in and mowed the plots 1 more time. So I mowed the plots after I broadcasted my turnips at the end of July, and I mowed them again at the end of August. That was simply to help take care of some weeds. I did have a fair amount of foxtails at that point that were trying to poke up between the turnips and the clover. So mowing it again at the end of August was key in helping reduce the weed pressure. Again, remember, I don't use any herbicides ever on my food plots, so there's many other tools you can use. You do not have to use something that comes in a jug. It is expensive and you have to spray it on your plot. There are many other ways, like the timing of your mowing. Now my next tip for small food plots is to resist the urge of working up the entire plot and planting it. In fact, my plot's approximately 1/3 of an acre, and I do not work the entire plot. In fact, I break this plot down into 3, 4 smaller strips. Deer by nature want cover, and so if you can leave some strips, and maybe you want to plant it with a screening of some sort, I simply leave the native grasses in between these strips. If you want the deer to be in your plot during daylight hours, you need some sort of cover. In fact, in my opinion, I believe it's psychological for the deer, because the strips that I leave, they don't cover the deer. In fact, some of those strips aren't even higher than the deer's back, but just having something there gives them a sense of security. Again, in the magazine, you want to see this great, big, beautiful food plot, but in my opinion, do not fall into that trap. And obviously I have some fruit trees here, so I have a strip by the fruit trees, but I left at least 2 or 3 other strips along the food plot to give them that security. So my last tip that I have is to monitor your food plots. Now obviously I have plenty of trail cameras and I had them scattered all throughout this 3rd acre food plot. Those cameras give me the assurance that the deer are definitely eating these turnips. They're eating the greens off the top of the turnips and they're actually eating the turnips themselves. So don't be afraid to put a trail camera right out in the middle of the plot, pound in a post, put a trail camera there. You'll get some great intel. You'll get to see when the deer are coming into the plot and exactly what they are eating. So now I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any comments or questions? Have you tried turnips? Have they been a success or a total failure? Do you have any other tips that I would find helpful? I encourage you to leave a comment down in the comment section. I often learn from the comments. I make a living planting and harvesting crops, but that doesn't mean there isn't something more that I can learn. So please, any tips or tricks, something you find helpful, put that down in the comment section. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.